Ripe Fruit is a nonprofit education initiative dedicated to identifying and strengthening innate skills as they appear along the spectrum of ways we think and learn. Our mission is to infuse mainstream learning with enhanced curriculum, customized lesson plans, and demonstrated creative systems. We aim to foster comprehensive learning, enthusiasm, and confidence for all students. The Dean Talks serves as a conduit, think tank, and intensive to discuss how to identify and support unique learning styles. All systems are go. The Dean Talks starts now. Welcome to the equity edition of the Dean Talks. Most people have a hard time identifying a life's purpose because they haven't been able to identify a strength or one that surpasses the rest. How can we explore a way to help identify strengths in individuals that can be strengthened and developed to superpower status? We will discuss the concept of the twice exceptional, 2E, and during this session. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of hosts or sponsors or Ripe Fruit Foundation. This information is not intended to replace therapeutic or medical advice. This session is being recorded. Today, we are joined by an amazing panel. I would like to welcome Kellyanne Pugh.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Stephen, for bringing me to the discussion, and Ebony for the invitation to continuously share my thoughts on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I am an engineer, an educator, transformational leader, and systems management business coach. And I am committed to facilitating individuals, community, and organizational change through transformation. That's my platform. Through working with business leaders and individuals that seek growth and advancement. So thank you for having me on this panel. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you for joining us. Nomita Advani.
Hi, I'm Nomita, and I'm a licensed art therapist. I've been working for the last 7 years in a clinical practice with children, adolescents, and adults. And prior to that, I was an art teacher and an art department chair at a private school for children with learning differences for about 15 years. And I look forward to our talk today as well.
Thank you for joining us. Nicole Fall.
Hi, I'm an artist educator. I've been teaching for over 30 years in a variety of settings, from senior citizens to private school to a public arts high school. And also I've been an associate professor at Baltimore City Community College. I've done a lot of arts, public art projects with people in their communities, along with working for Baltimore Clayworks in that capacity. And I just love working with people and seeing what they come up with and really helping them make the most of the talents and skills that they have. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining our panel, and thank you, panel, once again for being part of the Dean Talks. Ebony and Kellyanne have some talking points on the topic. Ebony Kinney.
Okay, thanks. All right, so I'm going to start off kind of, you heard Steve say at the top of the meeting, equity edition. You might wonder, well, what does Strengthfinders have to do with equity? So I kind of want to start off bridging that gap for us and going from what does it mean to be in an equity mindset around strength. So let me just go into presentation. Well, let me show you the slide here, basically. Let's think about equity in this way. There's two aspects to the definition. We talk a lot about the one aspect of the definition. We talk about giving people what they need so that they can thrive. Most people have heard that. That's sometimes talking about accessibility tools. Sometimes it's talking about curb cuts and closed captioning. And sometimes it is talking about giving people an opportunity, widening the door so that people who have had alternate life experiences, maybe someone's been homeless 10 years, maybe maybe they didn't finish college because they had something else going on, a health issue. Whatever it is, there are different experiences that weigh just as much as maybe some of the more formalized ways that we had decided that we will acknowledge success or acknowledge achievement or acknowledge an expertise. So the other aspect then of the equity definition that I want to bring to light at the beginning of this conversation is to recognize unique strengths and perspectives and positioning people so that we all can thrive. So in that picture that we've all seen a lot, I think we've seen people get different types of bikes based on their particular needs. And in an evolution of that, let's look at what else is specialized because of that person's needs or because of that person's unique positioning in life. The tallest person, for example, has the longest line of sight. They have the most unobstructed view, so to speak. The person in the front is right at the forefront. They're seeing things first. And the person in the back is almost getting a wider viewpoint. Maybe they're more protected. Of course, for the woman, I said she might have the broadest concerns or sensibilities. So we think about the things that give people a unique life viewpoint, innate talents, innate strengths. And then we think about where we might position them on a team so that they can shine. And so sometimes when we have this conversation, people want to remind us there is value in disability. If it wasn't for us acknowledging that disability is a thing, we wouldn't have some of the tools that we have in society that we all use, like raise your hand or nod if you use closed captioning, right? Or if you've used the curb cut because you needed to roll something with wheels onto the curb. But at the same time, how can we hold that and also hold space for what it means to be strong? I'm not going to talk much longer because I want to actually then go into what does it mean to into some of Kellyanne's points on this topic. But in a workplace, how can we build an equitable environment is an extension of this two sides of the equity conversation. The employee has a role where they're identifying their needs and their strengths and positioning themselves in a place where they can continually demonstrate it. It doesn't mean that they will be perfect in that role, but it means they are in development, and it's kind of known in that work environment. They're in development in this specific area because it is an innate talent that they demonstrate. They should also be tenacious. So if they're getting no's, they're not always getting every opportunity they go out for. They aren't always getting a receptive eye that they are sure about this thing and they move forward with it. The workforce can react by making room for this and supporting it. Mainly if they see marginalization, they should know it affects them too. Not just that, so marginalization means this group is more important than that group, or that group is not as important. If they see it, not thinking that's just for that particular group or that demographic, but knowing that it's the sort of thing that spreads. And so soon it will be, we can talk about how women have been marginalized in some workspaces. We can talk about how different groups have been marginalized. It doesn't want to roll. And so whenever you see it, identifying it and obliterating it. And then allowing difference. It's okay for you to be different. And then we go from this thing where we're reflecting each other to recognizing. You may not reflect me, but I recognize your struggle. I recognize your road. I recognize your path. I recognize your value. And then finally, organization can react by building processes to allow you to go from just this innate talent that you happen to have to this could turn into a career path for you. Finally, I just want to get to this point where we recognize that we can split that need-based and strength-based equity and end up in a place where instead of people having a reaction to you coming in as a diversity hire or a person who's not quite qualified, but we allowed them to sit in the room, you can go to a place where people feel empowered to put in their own definitions of value and their own individual paths and stories and kind of advocate for them as well. So it's a complete mind shift, and it isn't for one specific group. So I'm going to stop there. And then I'm going to actually turn it over to Kellyanne, who has some thoughts to share. And then we want to definitely open up the conversation to allow you all to react, give thoughts, and kind of go from there. So give 1 second. Kellyanne?
Yes. Hi, Ebony. I want to build on what you were talking about, how diverse individuals operate within a workspace or in a organized situation. I want to take us back to February of 2022, where we talked on podium about working in a diverse, neurodiverse universe. And then we talked about how utilizing our diverse brain functions to support team development. And we took time to break down how individuals support diverse neuro communities through education, through training, etc. I want to emphasize the fact that it's about going back to our senses. We have the ability to perform based on what we see, what we smell, what we touch, what we hear, and we want to continue to encourage diverse individuals, neurodiverse individuals to go into yourself and work on defining how you perform, how you show up. Next slide. And so what we're talking about today is how to identify the strengths that we have as neurodiverse individuals to create our superpowers. You know, what is it that is inside of us that allows us to perform at that high level, at the level where we have the ability to do more than one thing at a time. You know, we have the ability to really share our intellect on multiple levels. And so what we want to encourage through education and training is to ask the questions, what is seen? You know, what is visually impacting how you show up? What is heard? What external messages are impacting how you show up? What is experience and what is taste? How are you living? How is your health? So we want to continue, and I'm sure that our panelists will touch on this. We want to continue to educate the neurodiverse community to go within and pull out their superpowers. Would you agree, Ebony? Is that?
Absolutely. I think that what you touched on is that we can hold both extremes. And we're going to value what my unique perspective is, and also that we can allow me to demonstrate it, right?
That's it. Next slide. So we want to train individuals to go in as I suggested. And we know that as educators and managers, we seek to capture the insight. We want the individuals to inspect what's inside and what they can bring, what can be brought out. We want the individual to interpret, influence, and inject their gifts, their superpowers. So this is how we are suggesting to move forward. And I'm sure that this discussion will continue on during the panel discussion. Next slide. We want to help leaders and managers and educators to observe, right? These are the tools that we want to give these individuals to ensure a strong team environment, a healthy team environment. We want them to be able to identify those diverse senses. We want to empower individuals within the community to call on I am, to empower them to know who they are and how they show up. And we want to make sure that this is leveraged across the entire universe, whatever that universe is, whether it's a school situation or a work situation. We want to be able to have the leaders, managers, and educators come equipped. And so I believe this is what your goal is, Ebony, to gather the tools and the resources to make it easier for us to serve the neurodiverse community. Next slide. And so I say our purpose is to give neurodiverse individuals the direction to define their own purpose. giving them the ability and the encouragement to go in, find their strength, know that their senses are their superpowers. And so that's really what I do on a daily basis when I work with business leaders, when I work with students. It's our responsibility to give them the tools of empowerment and so they could show up and recognize their superpowers. So thank you, Ebony, for giving me the opportunity to share, and let's continue the discussion.
Thank you, Kellyanne.
Okay.
Well, that was again really, really well done. I particularly liked the taste and how that relates to health.
Yes.
That's just very well done. Okay, so now we have the we learned more about. Oh, one moment here.
Okay. Well, Jerome's ready to queue up our next video. We're actually going to have a little bit of a discussion and reaction for a moment, Jerome. So you can keep this up. We're going to talk for a few minutes before you press play.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so panel, what do you think so far about strength versus need-based equity? I can tell you, well, look, I'll tell you briefly just to get this started. This reminds me of the old affirmative action kind of, and how that was, what sparked that, and that is not really what the conversation is. But the conversation is we want to make sure that our communities are represented in, basically, government and in business. And I think that this is the next evolution of that process, which is certainly being applied in a more rational and fair way. So that's kind of where I am with this, and this is what makes this topic so timely. Is it's showing an evolution of how do we get full representation, not just from the demographic side of age and race, but from the neurodiverse side, as far as what are innate strengths and weaknesses, or what are innate strengths that can be pulled out and utilized, for the greater good, I guess.
Are there other reactions to the content that you heard? A lot of organizations are looking to consider neurodiversity, and I think they could be all over the place. They could be thinking about their bottom lines, or they could be thinking about a rich workplace, or the balance in between. So I'd love to hear what people are experiencing.
One thing I'm thinking is that when you talk about age, I might even consider that like a neurodiversity, because I feel like people, not across the board, but I feel like as people age, they think about things differently. They perceive things differently. They think differently. So just to put that thought out there. Not that a specific age could be classified as neurodiverse, but maybe like there are differences between that. So that's what jumped to my mind. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I'm done.
What also interests me, what I've been hearing is to interpret neurodiversity from the point of view of strengths, as opposed to what does this person, I mean, yes, we do want to know what they need to be successful, but instead of looking at it as a deficit, go, oh, well, this person has these certain skills. And, even educators could, and they do, tweak things to emphasize or help or keep those skills going. But I like the idea of really thinking about things in terms of people's strengths and what they have to offer, instead of looking at things as a deficit.
Yeah, Kellyanne, I was really, really heartened to see how specifically you work in the workforce to sort of carry forward, because I know in the school systems, some of this has been going on for a while and being applied with supports for students. So to have that carryover into the workspace is so important. So it was really great to see the breakdown. Thank you so much. And, I worked in a school where they were, particularly starting in middle school, they really started to have the students look inward and, go through some of those steps you were talking about to really understand their personal strengths, their learning style, all of that, in order to be able to self-advocate for that, so that they can become more independent and sort of move forward and start asking for their needs to be met. So for that to shut down at the workplace and not be set up sort of negates that work. So I thank you so much for everything you're doing, and it's really sort of follows through on that. So
Excellent.
I just wanted to say that. Yeah.
It is definitely a clear crossover, because that's what you're working towards, getting them to the workforce. So we have to have the tools in place across the board. So
Yes, thank you.
My name is Lori, and this is amazing. This is really great to hear all of the information put out today. I work in, I have a pediatric occupational therapy and speech therapy practice. And so everything that you're talking about in terms of the senses, we spend a lot of time on interoception. That's really, we really focus on that a lot right now. And so helping our kids identify even sensations in the body, you know, and become way more self-aware. You know, our goal is to set them up with more awareness for making decisions down the line. So all of this information is wonderful. And I love the idea of really framing it as their superpowers, because I see these kids and the way that they process information really is a superpower. Like they're remarkable. And I want them to know that. I want them to continue to know that. And I'm definitely going to use that terminology with them and their families, just to reiterate, you know, their strengths. And we do usually come from a strength base. At the same time, we have to work on some of those other areas that they need help with. But thank you for this presentation. This is wonderful to know that this is in place and that we as a society are moving in that direction for these kids and their families. So thanks.
Absolutely. And I would also just remind everyone that for more information on this topic and other related topics, please visit ripefruit.org. That's ripefruit.org. When thinking about political correctness, when we're in an age now where we almost have to position these conversations with a framework of etiquette that did not exist, you know, 30 years ago. 30 years ago, conversations were very direct, they were very kind of blunt, and now we are in a space of political correctness, which has now just taken over all conversations. So what is the etiquette of this conversation? I think you're experiencing that right now. And Lori, thanks again for your contribution. So we just learned equity can have a need and strength-based perspective. How do we move from one to the other? How can we live in both worlds, needing something and exhibiting strength? Are there any examples? Let's go to Nomita.
Thank you, Stephen. As a mental health provider, I think for me, the biggest sort of concern in this is making sure that both the needs and the strengths are finding their space, because, I mean, as human beings, everyone comes with needs and strengths. That's just how we're set up. Of course, in some cases, the needs, you know, may be more, or the strengths may be more. However, I feel neither one should obscure or cover over the other, because if someone says, oh, this person has strengths and therefore they don't need us, they're fine, they look great, they're doing very well, and so that need gets, you know, it doesn't get met. And I think, you know, just seeing the mental health right now, especially with people feeling like giving up now, or assuming things about each other, or not really checking in, and, you know, having young people sort of coming with such hopelessness and feeling like they don't, you know, have a reason to have motivation. I think it's really important that we find that balance. So even so, for example, in the school system, not assuming that because a student is so bright that they're not going to get funding for a need that they might have, a learning need, a learning disability that they require funding and support for. You know, and you see that with kids who have ADHD, or you see that with kids on the autism spectrum who can be extremely high functioning and very bright in certain areas. And so that's, I think, for me, really important because it will impact self-esteem. It will impact, bring about depression and anxiety if the child is not getting their needs met just because they might be showing a strength, or the opposite, if they're showing so much strength that their need just falls through the cracks and doesn't get addressed. So that's, for me, that balance, and the impact it can have on self-esteem, mental health, and a sense of self and motivation and all of those things, and what that, that trajectory. It's really, really important that people are assessing and watching and looking for and making sure that balance is met, and doing that for kids and then moving into, adults as well.
Okay. Is there any other panel contributions? All right. Very good. We have a video up next. So we're going to switch to a video snippet to share whenever you're ready.
For the person who's expected to code switch, to exist almost simultaneously in 2 or 3 different worlds, constantly presenting a slightly edited version of self, the pressure can be immense. But what if there was just one world where we could all be our true selves? Instead of the brand of diversity which purports that minorities are acceptable provided they behave in a specific way, what about a truer sense of diversity, where people are praised for their uniqueness and the cultural capital they bring to places and situations as opposed to being disciplined or shamed for it? What about an acceptance of different speech patterns, even within our own American lexicon, so that when a person says the word y'all, we appreciate what that might mean about their heritage or their upbringing, as opposed to what we think it means about their level of intelligence? Or when we see a person with a hijab or an afro, we embrace the reasons for someone's decision to do or to be something different than we are. I truly believe that most of us think diversity is a good thing. For the person who's expected to code switch, to exist almost simultaneously in 2 or 3 different worlds, constantly presenting a slightly edited version of self, the pressure can be immense. But what if there was just one world where we could all be our true selves? Instead of the brand of diversity which purports that minorities are acceptable provided they behave in a specific way, what about a truer sense of diversity, where people are praised for their uniqueness and the cultural capital they bring to places and situations as opposed to being disciplined or shamed for it? What about an acceptance of different speech patterns, even within our own American lexicon, so that when a person says the word y'all, we appreciate what that might mean about their heritage or their upbringing, as opposed to what we think it means about their level of intelligence? Or when we see a person with a hijab or an afro, we embrace the reasons for someone's decision to do or to be something different than we are.
You can stop it. It actually
I truly believe that most of
awesome.
Okay. So our relationship with code switching, which is speaking multiple cultural languages, is a love-hate. How can we put it to use? Ebony, can you lead the conversation?
Sure. I think it's important for us to talk about what is code switching a little bit. Again, I like to always broaden these definitions. So you hear a lot of marginalized or maybe BIPOC communities talk about code switching because how they talk to their friends might be different than how they talk to their coworkers. But if you look at the wider lens, I think most of us talk a little differently to our friends and our family than we do when we're at work. And then we have other actual, when we go class, there's like a class code switch that we do. There's probably an education code switch. If we know we're talking to a professor or someone that is more learned, we might have a different code switch. We're going to make sure we say our complete thoughts or the ends of our words a little differently than say in a social setting. So when we think about code switching, we're just talking about that flexibility, and some people may have a more sharpened ability to do it than others. Mm-hmm. So what I guess the main thing I will bring out about that though is my concern, and what kind of maybe keeps me up about this is, are we moving back towards segregated environments? Because as we talk about charter schools and we talk about Montessori and these schools that are specialized in providing customized experiences, I want to bring it back into the mainstream. And so for, how that links to code switching is to say that if you have a skill and we have put you in a place to develop that skill to the next level and it's separated, we will eventually need to bring that back into the mainstream. I guess a small example is they got me to go to a woman-owned university undergrad because they told me the stats about how women speak out more in a woman-owned, a woman, or a woman, I guess it's a girls-only school. This is slipping my mind how I should properly say it. And I did it. And I felt, yes, I will speak up. I won't hesitate because it's a mixed gender classroom. And what I found out is in the end, you still need to learn how to play on that other playing field. So Ripe Fruit has done some lessons, and I invite you all out. I can put the link in the chat to take this lesson where they take different types of stimuli. There's different stimuli that we bring into the lesson. So you're watching an intersection, and then you hear music and you see sounds and you see layers, and there's like all these things happening, and you're sharpening your ability to like identify when does the stimulation come in. And that's just one example how we could take a strength and kind of strengthen our ability to identify when the stimuli comes in. What that has to do with code switching is that if we brought that to a mainstream classroom and everyone took the lesson, then this ability that you have that you can demonstrate in this unique environment, you're allowed to demonstrate it on the wider stage, say the whole classroom, and kind of see how it measures up. And I think that's how we'll get to the place where we can identify strengths like on a different stage. So now I kind of twisted that conversation for you, but that's what I do. I Rubik's Cupid. So please react, and I invite the other panelists to join in.
Well, I'll say also, I was a sculptor in the 1980s. I still am, doing metal sculpture, and it was a predominantly male field. And so, in terms of code switching, I had to be much more strong in my presentation, and there was this kind of intimidation, like, oh, if we just push her enough, she'll back down. And so I had to be pretty strong that way in graduate school, actually, too. And my department chair, who was a white male, said at the end of it, he goes, oh, you're a really aggressive person. And I'm like, I was being defensive the entire time. And my daughter is she works in IT, and she has to deal with that as well, which is that, it's a male dominated field, and she was told to speak up more. And then when she spoke up more, she was told she was being too aggressive. Mm-hmm. So for women have to negotiate this kind of thing too. I mean, we all do. We all have different places where we code switch, like with our parents, it's like we are very different with our parents than we are with anyone else. So it is out there. And that's just a couple of thoughts I have about it.
I want to build on what you were saying, and in the sense that we're recognizing the impact that code switching has on us as individuals. It is traumatic. We are experiencing trauma, and so there has to be a point where we set aside time to heal that. And just some background. I come from the projects with a single mother, and I went to an engineering school, and I was going to make it happen. And I did. But the trauma that came from it, I have to deal with along the way while you keep moving forward. So I think when we're talking about the code switching, and we're giving individuals tools to move through the code, we have to set aside time to address the trauma, which is tricky because, right, are we being funded for that? So I'll just add that to the discussion.
I think it's very important to discuss trauma, and also, this idea that if you just try really hard or you're just really talented, it's all going to happen for you. I think if people are brought up to understand, and some people are, that you're going to run into these walls that people aren't going to want to, or doors that people aren't going to want to let you into, but that just keep going. Yeah. That and give find out different ways to negotiate that space. But I think people can give up too soon when they say, oh, I'm trying really hard, I'm really talented, and I'm not getting anywhere. You don't want them to stop what they're doing. You want them to keep going. And I think, we can educate people more about that.
Time is irrelevant.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have there are a couple of great points that were brought out. So let's just take a couple of minutes here. One is, let's talk about trauma. There is I think there is kind of an innate attraction to trauma and mitigating trauma, because as we go back in the past, trauma was bad. What is trauma 1,000 years ago? Maybe some person was attacking you and you could get killed, versus how trauma has the trauma conversation has evolved to where you're not necessarily in as much danger, but you are still in emotional danger. So what that means is our positioning of diversity as a strength is where we begin to turn that conversation into how do we put action steps in place to move from the trauma conversation into the healing conversation. And I think that's really a space for us to occupy, is what do we do? What are the action steps to make that happen and to mitigate that trauma conversation? Does anyone have any comments on that?
I think, really starting young is the key, whether it's in our education system or in parenting, that we parent boys and girls differently, and that needs to change. Also in the classroom, when we say, okay, we're going to break up into math groups and reading groups, and and then we assess the children, and then we put them in these groups, like Ebony, you were saying, what's happening where people are becoming more grouped, whether it's through ability or whether it's through cultural difference or ethnic background. It's really important. So for example, in a math group, and we tried this, and this was something that was considered, is that you don't group the best, and because the children will absorb that no matter how the adults try to label it. The children absorb it, they understand, they know what is meant. So we have to be really careful that just because we put a label on it and say call it something doesn't mean it's absorbed in that same way. So maybe thinking about grouping based on the teacher being the facilitator who understands every child's strength in that group, whether it's math related or not, in a math group. So the child who's really emotionally intelligent, when we think of the multiple intelligences, the child who is, bright in math and just gets it naturally, versus the child who brings their empathy, and so you group all of them. And the child who is, is bright in math can sometimes lead and help the child who may need that, and sort of find that strength that, oh, I can help with math. And then this, at the same thing, the child who may not have that same math level ability will help that child who's bright in math at a different time with empathy about something else within the group, because those opportunities come up every day. Children are spending 7 hours a day in school, and there's always that opportunity. So, for educators to kind of find those moments and facilitate that, and think about groupings maybe in a different way, and think about groupings more on the multiple intelligence versus this is a math group, and so it has to be only everybody who's good in math. That was, just something, as a possible example of, but it has to start young when the kids, it has to become habits that they take in as they're being sort of guided through this, where they understand that, well, I'm just as important in this math group as someone else, and it's not all about math, for example.
And I just want to add in, thank you for that resonates, that like reflects agile groups. If you work in an agile environment, it's done in construction, it's done in IT. They take an analyst is in the room, someone from policy, and also a developer, and also a product lead, because they're learning that that's the strongest group. So when you can do that and allow people to be who they are, you don't need to code switch. And that's probably the full circle of it, right? You don't need to reflect you don't have to reflect. I can recognize you for your strength and you belong.
Ebony, while you're there with the agile piece, and we're defining code switching, so what you're saying is using the agile model means each cog in that wheel speaks to their point, and therefore there isn't that need to try to jump from the math wheelhouse into the music wheelhouse, when the math person will talk about math, the music person will talk about music, and then you kind of have a project lead there to coordinate that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is really what happens. And there is actually a link between music and math, but you have to make it maybe for some students. The instructors in the room can do that dive there, right? Because that metronome and being able to know the exact beat is actually math, but maybe they don't know it. But absolutely what you said, everyone can demonstrate their strength, and then there's a seat just for them. Yeah.
And,
That
and
is so
yeah.
Yeah, that is absolutely fascinating, which is how that just organizational structure really is kind of demonstrates the etiquette of a totally neurodiverse conversation. That's good. I like that agile thing. I think we'll probably do some more research on that. I'm sorry I interrupted someone.
No, I was just in agreement with everyone, and it really goes back to showing up as your authentic self. And that's our job, to help individuals to just show up as you and understand who you are. So no matter what environment you're in, you're whole and present. So.
Okay, so we're going to there are a couple of exercises that we want to try to get to within this hour. So let's go to, how does someone go from motivation and confidence to forward moving action? Nicole?
Okay, so one of the things I would think is that there really has to be a holistic approach. What kids start, their teachers emphasize that, if someone is motivated and wants to learn more about a thing, it behooves everyone around them to kind of encourage that and offer them opportunities. So some parents can't offer these opportunities, they can't afford it, but there are free, if they're interested in the arts, sometimes there are these free things that people can attend. But I can tell you this from my experience as a teacher in the city school system. I had a student whose work got into the citywide school thing, and I needed the parent to sign the permission slip to show the work. And the parent said, they said they might not put the work in the show, and I just don't want your feelings to get hurt, and I just don't think you should participate. So it's educating the parents too, that to give your child these opportunities, even these little small things that come up. And so I think there has to be, somehow we have to get this information out. We have to get out this information about how everyone has strengths in the way that they think, and the multiple intelligences that we've touched on here. Some people have intrapersonal intelligence, where they're very aware of how they think and how they feel. Then there's interpersonal intelligence, where people learn how to work together. I mean, people are very cued into how to work with other people. I think I'm diverging a little bit here, so I'll be quiet.
No, that was very well placed, and certainly wasn't divergent. It's really what it boils down to in these conversations is there's a logical thread to most things. So what I would like to do now is, if there are any other panelists who would like to talk about the motivation and confidence to forward moving action, certainly jump in. If not, we're going to move along to Ebony Kinney and cocology. So anyone else want to contribute to that last question? Okay. Ebony, at the beginning of this session in our green room meeting, it's what was brought up that cocology is a personality game. Can you elaborate?
I don't know if you'll see it, because it's called Cocology, and it is a book written, I'm not going to be able to pronounce the guy's name, but you can find it on Amazon, and it has a whole bunch of psychology kind of games, but it's just a way to think about it differently. It's kind of the same things that you might do in a therapy or strength building exercise activity, but kind of put in a book. So I'm just going to go through one of the activities. It's a quicker one, so I invite you to do this with me. So you're at a summer fair, and there's all sorts of toys and crafts and oil paintings, silver jewelry, everything being offered. Everything is made by hand. No two items are alike. So why not stop and see what's for sale, right? So you think to yourself, how can I be engaged in this environment? So I'm going to give you 4 questions and you kind of react. You may want to take a pen and write it down or just note mentally. 1, you've opened your own tabletop. Now you're offering something at the fair to sell your own handmade jewelry. How many different types of accessories and bangles and, for people who don't, might not think I'll make accessories and bangles, ties and tie clips, right? Do you put on display? How many different types do you put on display? So you may write that down or just think mentally what you might do. 2, a person walks up and looks over at your table, but after only a moment walks away without buying anything. What is the thought that you have? What do you think to yourself in response to that? So you might write that down or note it mentally, right? So 3, another potential customer comes up and seems extremely interested in one of your designs. In fact, you consider it the best piece of your collection, your prize that you made. What type of salesmanship would you use to recommend it? And that you might just note what you might do to try and sell that to the person who is interested. That's number 3. And then number 4, it's time to close up the shop for the day. How would you describe your sales? And you want to describe it in like, you imagine that you sold everything, or you imagine that, oh, I did okay, or you imagine that I didn't do so well. So this is just about you and your outlook, not based on the other scenarios. Okay. All right. So now we're gonna like look at our answers. So 1, the number of different, so let me say, here your responses to the scenario show how you hope to be viewed by others. That's important. The number of different kinds of jewelry you sell corresponds to the number of different personas or social masks you wear in different situations, code switches, if you will. These are the faces you put on in front of your friends, your parents, your bosses, your partner. The more you have, the more complicated your social life will seem. So that's something to note if you put 2 down as opposed to 22 or 2, right? And I'd love to hear if people want to share their responses at the end, but I won't force you. It's your business. 2, the feeling you had at losing a customer corresponds to your feelings after a heartbreak or other rejection. Do you feel it was something you did wrong? I wonder what they didn't like. Or do you shrug it off? Do you take the chance to make some critical observations of yourself? And, I wouldn't know quality workmanship if it walked up and hit me on the nose, or they wouldn't know it if it hit them on the nose, right? Do you make it a judgment thing? Okay. 3, the way you talked about your finest piece reflects what you feel your own strong points are and the ways you try to express them to others. So did you try a low-key approach, let the customer make their own minds up? Did you hammer the point home? Did you badger them? You make them try it on. In my mind, I made them try. Here, try it on. And then, or did you offer a lower asking price? And so it's just a note there, be careful not to sell yourself too short if that was your approach. And then 4, and finally, your sales totals for the day is an evaluation of your own social achievement, like through your eyes. Those who said they sold out their entire stock, you're not short on self-assurance, very healthily confident. Just try not to scare people off with your boldness. If you said you had a bad day, you may need a little boost in self-esteem. Don't be too hard on yourself. Customers can smell doubt a mile away. If you had average sales for the day, you're the type of person who understands your true place in the world without undervaluing your worth. And then that may be the key to achieving long-term success. And, they're saying in this line of work. So if you're going to open actually a stand, but otherwise it's insights into life. Okay. Thanks for playing along. Thoughts, reactions, shares.
Well, my thought was this is almost a personality kind of assessment, and it was well done because, at first it's kind of like, wait a minute, what are we talking about here? We're at a fair, or, it just conjures up this whole this whole image of a fair, and then everything was brought home specifically with the various, it's like the questions that were being asked were not necessarily immediately recognizable to the answers that were being collected. So I thought that was, just very well done, which is just indicative of how the Dean Talks operate in the first place. I want to remind you about our Facebook group. We'll touch base on that a little bit later on. Anyone else?
I think it's a good check-in on self-esteem, because a lot of that is around, how do you view yourself and where you are on that spectrum. So I think that's a helpful sort of check-in on that. It was for me anyway.
Okay. This has been an information-packed Dean Talk, and I want to now kind of shift towards our panelists again and focus a little bit on what they are working on. And when I recognize you, panelists, talk about what you're working on, and then also give your preferred way of contact for our viewers. So, Namita, what do you have going on?
Well, this year, just keeping up with my caseload has not left a whole lot of time for too much extra. So I'm hoping next year I'll be able to put some more things together. But I can be reached by email. And I think that is in the chat or will be.
Okay, very good. And yes, Namita Advani's email is in the chat. You're welcome to reach out to her. Nicole, what do you have going on?
Hi. Well, I've been helping my mother out a lot over the past couple of months. My husband and I are working together. We work with communities to make an art project, and we finished something with the Boys and Girls Club, the Brooklyn O'Malley Boys and Girls Club in Baltimore, where the kids drew pictures of their neighborhood or of the city, and then we put their images together, and they ended up becoming grill work on their windows, so they can see them from inside the building and outside, and the kids like pointing out which ones they did. So we're looking to do more stuff like that. It was fun.
Outstanding, and always interesting contributions. Kellyanne, what do you have going on?
Yes, I continue to work with small businesses and giving them guidance as they develop solutions around resiliency through sustainability. So I stay in that space where I'm always working on economic development, community engagement, and NEE, education, environment, energy. So you can find me at kfu@me.com.
Okay. And your contact information will also be in the chat, reminding folks that you can always visit ripefruit.org. That's ripefruit.org for more information about Dean Talks and more information about our illustrious panelists. Ebony Kinney, what do you have going on?
I didn't know I was in the list. Okay, so Ripe Fruit is gearing up for their show next year. Our shows next year. So we're going to do trauma, defining traumatized, and kind of digging into that in neurodiversity. He's got lead, so we're going to talk about lead and climate change and the state of water and that's impact on neurodiversity. Nothing but a number. So we're going to talk about ageism, the historical context of unique. How do people used to look at it, and the age-wage gap. A growing conversation. Born to Wander, so we'll talk about immigrants, second generation, gentrification and transplants. For the culture, which is going to be culturalization, race and gender, probably really big budding conversation to that, and neurodiversity. And finally, broke ain't dumb. So we're going to talk about socioeconomics, wealth gap and poverty and its impact on neurodiversity. So that's what I'm excited about the most. There's a lot going on. Reach out, I can share more.
Okay. And I also would like to remind everyone that Ebony has a website, which is ebonylkinney.com. ebonylkinney.com does a much deeper dive into some of the accomplishments and some of the trajectories that have built the Ebony Kinney that we all know and love. Big hits and takeaways. So we have a poll that we're going to launch. And Ebony Kinney, back to you.
Okay, the poll will pop up on your screen. Give it a moment. I'd love for us to open up the conversation for reactions and things that people have not been able to share so far. In the meantime, while we get the poll sent out to you.
Well, I'll lead that conversation. This has been just a great Dean Talk, And I'm noticing that the Dean Talks from when we started a year ago, we've been doing this for a whole year, and we have just grown so much. I'm really looking forward to our 2023 Dean Talk season. Take a look into the chat, and you will see actually a poll that has popped up, which is, we solicit your input. And I remind you that the Dean Talks are all recorded and captured, and they're available on multiple platforms, whether it be Facebook or YouTube. So we certainly invite you to circle back and go over some of the more interesting things that you may have heard, because we do move very quickly in our format. We have a lot of information to cover. So as you look at the poll there, and as we take a look at the time, we are at the top of the hour. And therefore, that is a conclusion point for this Dean Talk. Make sure you review our chat for any links that you're interested in. And I want to thank you for a year of wonderful support and engagement. And Ebony Kinney went over the next year's programming schedule. You can view that in detail at ripefruit.org. That's ripefruit.org. Any last comments from the panel?
Thanks for joining.
Okay, very good. So once again, it is the top of the hour. This has been another successful Dean Talk. Be sure and join us in 2023. Visit ripefruit.org. That's ripefruit.org for Dean Talks, and you'll also get a glimpse into the Creative Kid podcast as a little bit of a tease. And I can tell you this, in 2023, your host, Stephen King, will actually be on camera. So it took me a whole year for me to say, that's just how I am. A whole year tease so that in 2023, I can actually be on camera just like the rest of our panel. So you will see me in 2023, and we hope to see you in 2023 for our session of Dean Talks. Thanks, everyone.